Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Deep Dive. We're diving deep today into self-sabotage. We're using Brianna Wiest's book, The Mountain Is You. And this book is really packed with those aha moments. You know, the ones where you're like, how did I not realize this before?
Definitely. I think we're going to be tackling some of those frustrating patterns we all have when you're almost there at your goal and then you just trip yourself up.
Exactly. So you'll learn how to spot those signs of self-sabotage, like maybe perfectionism, maybe surrounding yourself with people who aren't really supporting you.
Yeah.
But even more than that, we're going to unpack the deeper reasons why we do this to ourselves.
Right. It's not about self-hatred, but it's more about understanding those commitments we might have but we don't really realize.
Hmm.
Like staying small or avoiding discomfort or even just maintaining those unhealthy patterns that are so familiar.
Okay, so let's dive right in with the core concept. The mountain is you. Now, Weiss uses this as a metaphor to really show us how often the biggest obstacles we face are actually internal. So it's not about all these external things that are holding us back. It's the things that we're building inside.
Yeah. She argues that we create these internal mountains out of our own insecurities or even a subconscious desire to protect ourselves from being disappointed or being hurt.
And to illustrate this, she has this great anecdote about Carl Jung.
Yes. Jung had these fainting spells as a child, and he called this a neurosis. And he realized later on that his subconscious was actually helping him get out of school because he really wasn't happy there. Isn't that wild?
Oh my gosh. That makes me think about all those times I've procrastinated
Yeah.
on things that actually really matter to me.
Yeah.
Is that my form of fainting?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe it is. Wyeth says that self-sabotage often comes from those negative associations we've developed, from childhood.
Like, for example, if your parents were always anxious about money, they didn't talk about wealth as something positive, then maybe you might subconsciously sabotage your own financial success.
Totally. These deep-seated beliefs are like these invisible barriers. And they prevent us from getting to where we want to go, even when we think we want it.
So then how do we even begin to address these patterns? Wayles talks about upper limits. It's like this internal thermostat for happiness. And when we go past it, we start self-sabotaging.
It's a fascinating concept. You know Gay Hendricks, he calls this our upper limit. Basically our tolerance for how happy and how successful we can let ourselves be. And then when we start feeling too good, that's when those behaviors come in to bring us back down.
Okay, but how do we identify our own upper limits? Do they come with like a warning label?
I wish. That's where self-awareness is so important. Wales says pay attention to those patterns that just keep repeating. So are there areas where you always hit a wall no matter how hard you try? That could be your upper limit right there.
Like you're constantly getting passed over even though you're qualified. Or your relationships always seem to fall apart when they start getting serious.
Exactly. So once you've identified that pattern, then you can start challenging the beliefs that might be driving it. Waynest really emphasizes tackling them head on and then replacing them with affirmations that actually empower you.
Instead of thinking, oh, I don't deserve love, you can start to affirm something like, I am worthy of a healthy and loving relationship.
Right. It's all about changing that voice inside your head, from doubt to believing in yourself. And honestly, that shift can make all the difference in breaking through those limits.
It's like we're rewiring our brains.
And on top of that, it's important to surround yourself with people who are supportive, people who believe in you, because their encouragement can help you overcome those moments when you start doubting yourself.
So it's not just about what we tell ourselves, but who we surround ourselves with.
It's huge. The people you spend time with can really impact your mindset and whether you actually achieve your goals.
Okay, so we've talked about internal mountains and those upper limits.
Yeah.
But what are some concrete examples of how self-sabotage shows up in our everyday lives?
Whereas breaks down a few common forms that I think we've all probably been guilty of. One is perfectionism. You know those impossibly high standards that make us so afraid of messing up that we just get paralyzed?
Oh, yeah. I know some perfectionists. They would rather not do something at all if they can't do it perfectly.
Right. It's like if you're so scared of writing a bad song, you just never write any songs at all.
Exactly. And then there's that thing where we justify everything. We make these elaborate excuses for why we haven't reached our goals, almost like the excuse becomes the accomplishment.
Like that friend who's always talking about starting a business, but never actually does anything. Oh, I'm too busy. I need to do more research. But really, it's probably fear holding them back.
And what about downplaying our successes? You know, some people just brush off compliments or act like their accomplishments are no big deal.
Yeah, it's like they feel bad for doing well, or maybe they don't want to stand out and get negative attention, so they just try to stay small and invisible.
And then, of course, we have those bad habits, We just can't seem to let them go, even when we know they're not good for us.
Staying busy, even when it's not really necessary. That's a big one. It's a way to distract ourselves or make ourselves feel important.
It's like we're addicted to chaos,
Yeah.
even when it's exhausting and unproductive.
Wiest also talks about the wrong kinds of people. You know those friends who put you down or make you feel bad about yourself? They can be a huge source of self-sabotage.
Those relationships are tough because maybe on a deeper level they fulfill a need, like a need for validation or drama, but they stop us from growing.
Exactly. Sometimes you just gotta let go of those relationships. It's like self-care.
So how do we start to see these patterns in our own lives? It seems like they can be really hard to spot.
It all starts with paying attention. Noticing those recurring patterns, those situations where you just keep tripping up over and over.
But how do we figure out what the patterns mean?
Well, that's where Weiss gives us this really cool tool. She has a list of common self-sabotaging behaviors, and she explains the hidden reasons behind them. It's like a decoder ring for your own mind.
So like, if you keep going back to the same person who hurt you, maybe that means you need to look at your childhood relationships.
Right. It's like we're subconsciously trying to recreate those old dynamics because they feel familiar, even if they're bad for us.
Or if you always seem to find partners who aren't emotionally available, maybe that means you believe deep down that you don't deserve love.
Exactly. It's all about figuring out what need those self-sabotaging behaviors are fulfilling and then finding healthier ways to get those needs met.
This is all so insightful, but it's also a little overwhelming. I mean, where do we even start to untangle all of this?
Well, the good news is you don't have to do it all at once. Remember those micro shifts we talked about? Even small changes can make a huge difference over time.
So instead of trying to change your whole life, just focus on one tiny change at a time.
Yes. And those little wins will build your confidence. And that'll keep you going.
Wow. This is giving me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
I'm already starting to see some of these patterns in my own life. How about you? Have any of these concepts resonated with you?
Yeah, it's amazing how much these patterns can affect us without us even realizing it. But I think the more we learn about them, the more we can actually do something about it.
Absolutely. And one thing that really stuck out to me in the book is how important emotional intelligence is. It's not just about, thinking positive thoughts. It's about actually dealing with the negative emotions too.
That's such a good point. We always hear, oh, just be happy, don't worry, be positive. But she actually makes a case for leaning into those emotions that we don't like.
I mean, I could see why that might seem a little strange. Who wants to feel sad or angry or frustrated, right?
Definitely not fun. But those emotions are there for a reason. They're trying to tell us something. And if we ignore them, we're basically ignoring our own internal guidance system.
So instead of pushing them away, we should make space for them.
Exactly. She talks about how important it is to acknowledge and process our emotions, even the ones that make us uncomfortable. And she even has some techniques we can use.
Like journaling. I always found that writing down my feelings is really helpful, like a weight off my shoulders.
Journaling is great for that. It gets all those thoughts and feelings out of your head and onto paper, and that can help you see things more clearly.
What about meditation? Did she talk about that?
She does. Mindfulness meditation can be so helpful for becoming more aware of your emotions. You learn to observe them without judging them, and that can help you detach from them and feel more in control.
So it's not about getting rid of negative emotions altogether,
Right.
but learning how to deal with them.
Right, and sometimes it's as simple as just letting yourself cry. Tears can be really cleansing, both physically and emotionally.
I'm all for a good cry. So once we've processed those emotions, what then? How do we actually change those behaviors?
Well, she talks about disconnecting action from feeling, because our feelings aren't always the best guide for what we should do.
That makes sense. How many times have we put something off just because we didn't feel like it?
All the time, right. But the truth is, we can't just wait for motivation to magically appear. Sometimes we have to act even when we don't feel like it.
So it's more about discipline than motivation.
Yeah, in a way, it's about building that habit of taking action consistently, regardless of how you feel.
But how do you make yourself do something when you just don't feel like it?
That's where microshifts come in. Trying to change everything at once usually doesn't work. It's just too much and we fall back into our old ways.
So instead of trying to climb the whole mountain in one go, we take smaller steps.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Instead of meditating for an hour, start with 5 minutes. Instead of changing your whole diet overnight, just swap out one sugary drink for water each day.
Those small changes might not seem like much, but they can add up over time.
It's like that butterfly effect. One little flap of a butterfly's wings can cause a hurricane on the other side of the world. Those small, consistent actions can lead to some pretty big results.
She also talks about how important it is to embrace discomfort.
Absolutely. We can't grow and reach our potential if we're not willing to step outside of our comfort zone.
Like they say, life begins at the end of your comfort zone, right?
Exactly. And instead of seeing discomfort as a reason to stop, she wants us to see it as a sign that we're on the right track.
So those feelings of awkwardness or uncertainty, those could actually be a good thing.
It's like stretching a muscle. It might feel uncomfortable, but it's good for you in the long run.
That's such a different way of looking at it. Instead of being afraid of discomfort, we can see it as a chance to grow.
And that can be really freeing.
Okay, so we've talked about embracing our emotions, taking action, and even being okay with discomfort. But how does all of this connect to finding our purpose? How do we know what we're really meant to do with our lives?
She says our purpose isn't something we find out there, it's something we create. It's not about waiting for some magical sign. It's about actively shaping our own destiny.
So no waiting for a lightning bolt of inspiration.
Right. She believes that our purpose comes from the combination of our skills, our passions, and what the world needs.
So it's like finding that sweet spot where what you're good at, what you love, and what the world needs all intersect.
Yes. And she actually gives some questions to help us explore this. What are your unique strengths? What are you passionate about? What problems in the world do you care about solving?
That's great. It's like drawing a Venn diagram of your skills, your passions, and the needs of the world. And where those three circles overlap, that's your purpose.
I love that. And when you focus on that intersection, you can start to live a life that's truly meaningful.
It's like we're not just living for ourselves, we're part of something bigger.
And that sense of purpose can be so motivating and fulfilling.
You know, we've been talking a lot about the internal stuff, like our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. But she also talks about external factors like the people we spend time with.
That's right. The people we surround ourselves with can either help us grow or hold us back.
It's like that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you're around negative people, it's going to be harder to break those self-sabotaging patterns.
She says we need to choose our social circles carefully and build a support system of people who inspire us, challenge us, and help us stay on track.
It's like having your own personal cheerleading squad.
Exactly. And when you're surrounded by people who are positive and supportive, it creates an environment that helps you grow.
So it's not just about the work we do on ourselves, it's also about creating the right environment outside of ourselves.
Absolutely. And that might mean setting boundaries with negative people, finding new friends, or joining groups of people who share your values.
It's like a whole life approach to self-improvement, looking at our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and relationships.
And when you approach it that way, it all works together to help you move forward.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. Emotional intelligence, taking action, finding our purpose, surrounding ourselves with good people. But I want to go back to one of her main messages. The biggest obstacle to our goals is often ourselves.
That is so true. We tend to focus so much on things outside of us, but really it's our own thoughts, beliefs, and fears that hold us back the most.
It's like we have all this potential inside of us, but we get in our own way. We doubt ourselves, we second-guess our decisions, and we let fear paralyze us.
And she wants us to face those fears and start believing in ourselves.
She reminds us that we're capable of so much more than we think.
And that belief is key to overcoming self-sabotage and creating a life that we truly love.
And speaking of creating a life we love, she has this really interesting exercise for connecting with our highest potential future selves.
Yeah. It's a visualization where you imagine you're sitting down with the best version of yourself you can possibly imagine. What does that future you look like? How do they feel? What are they doing?
It's like getting a sneak peek into the amazing future you could have. And when you connect with that vision, you start to embody those qualities and actions that will get you there.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
And it shows how important it is to have a vision for your future. Where do you want to be in 5 years? In 10 years? What kind of life do you want to create?
And she says it's not just about setting goals, it's about making sure those goals match up with our values.
She talks about how important it is to live by principles. Principles are like living beneath your means. They're not as flashy as a vision board, but they're way more effective.
It's like building a house on a solid foundation. If you don't have that, the whole thing can fall apart.
And inspiration can come and go, but principles give you that structure and consistency you need to stay on track.
Right. Principles are about the long game. Making choices that align with your values, even when they're hard or not very exciting.
And sometimes that means letting go of the need to please other people or worry about what they think. She talks about this trap of psychic thinking, where we waste so much time trying to guess what everyone else is thinking about us.
Oh my gosh. I do that all the time. It's like I'm constantly trying to read people's minds and figure out if they're judging me.
But she reminds us that most people are too busy thinking about themselves to be that concerned with what we're doing.
That is such a relief. It's like we can finally stop worrying about what everyone else thinks and just focus on what matters to us.
It's so empowering.
This whole conversation is really making me rethink things. I'm seeing self-sabotage in a whole new way.
That's great. And remember, this is a journey, not a destination. There will be times when you struggle and times when you make progress. But if you stick with it and learn from your experiences, you can create a really amazing life.
Her book is so full of insights and practical advice for achieving that. But I'm curious what stands out to you as one of the most important takeaways.
I think for me, it's that idea of really accepting yourself, like all of yourself, even the parts you don't like. That's where true healing comes from.
Yeah, like recognizing that we're all a work in progress. And that's totally fine. No one's perfect.
Exactly. Our imperfections don't define us. They're actually part of what makes us unique.
It's like we're finally giving ourselves permission to just be human with
Yeah.
all our flaws. And that takes so much pressure off. We don't have to try to fix everything about ourselves. We can just focus on learning and growing.
She talks about life being this constant process of growth. We're always learning and changing and becoming more ourselves.
And that journey has its ups and downs. But if we embrace the process, who knows what we can achieve? Earlier when we were talking about those upper limits and how our brains are always wanting more, it made me think, will we ever really be content? Are we just going to keep chasing the next goal forever?
That's a great question. And she actually addresses that in the book. She says our brains are wired to be constantly seeking and striving. So even when we reach a goal, that feeling of satisfaction doesn't always last. We're always looking for the next thing to achieve.
It's like we're addicted to that feeling of getting something new.
Exactly. That drive can be a good thing, but it also means we need to be realistic about our expectations.
Yeah, like realizing that happiness isn't something you find at the end of the road. It's about enjoying the journey itself.
Right. It's about finding joy in the process of growing and working towards something, not just focusing on the end result.
And she talks about making those micro shifts, those small changes that can make a big difference over time. She says trying to change everything at once usually doesn't work.
It's just too much to handle all at once. It's like trying to eat an entire cake in one bite.
So instead, we focus on making small, sustainable changes every day.
Like taking the stairs instead of the elevator.
Perfect analogy. And those little things start to add up over time. You build momentum, and eventually those small steps get you to where you want to be.
And she also talks about how important it is to embrace discomfort. Growth and change usually means stepping outside of our comfort zone.
It's that whole life begins at the end of your comfort zone thing.
Exactly. And when we're willing to be uncomfortable, we open ourselves up to so many new possibilities.
So instead of running away from discomfort, we can actually see it as a sign that we're on the right path, that we're growing.
Right. It's about changing how we think about discomfort and realizing that it's a necessary part of becoming the best versions of ourselves.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm really inspired to look at my own patterns of self-sabotage and start making those small changes that will help me reach my goals.
That's great to hear. And remember, this is a journey. It's not about being perfect. It's about continuing to learn and grow throughout our lives.
She reminds us that we're capable of so much more than we think we are.
She's basically saying, let's step into our power, embrace who we are, and create lives that we're truly passionate about.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into self-sabotage, think about one small step you can take today to break free from a pattern that's been holding you back.
And it could be anything. Meditating for 10 minutes, calling a friend who supports you, or finally taking action on a goal you've been putting off.
Every journey starts with a single step.
And by taking those steps consistently, we can create lives that are full of purpose, joy, and fulfillment.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into self-sabotage. We hope you've learned something valuable and feel empowered to create the life you truly want.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep climbing your own mountain.